Hey everybody, Luke here, and just wanted to take a moment here today and talk about bulging discs. And when you talk about bulging discs in the low back, you can't help but talking about sciatic type pain as well, which is that pain that starts around your buttocks and shoots down the back of your leg typically. So wanted to just go in depth today about what causes that type of pain when it's a bulging disc. I do want to say there are a few different things that can cause sciatic pain, but by far and away the number one thing is a bulging disc, which puts pressure on a nerve. So what I want to do first is just go into kind of some anatomy of the spine so you can understand what we're dealing with. So from the front view here, here's the spine. I'm not sure how well you can see that on the video. Let me do a little close-up here. But I've got them labeled there, L1, L2, L3, 4, and 5. Those are your lumbar vertebrae. So those are the bottom vertebrae in your spine sitting right on top of the pelvis. So on this model here, the vertebrae are just the bones. In between each vertebrae, you're going to have a spacer, and that's your disc. That's where you get your bulging disc, is right there. And that disc serves a couple different functions. You get a lot of movement out of there, and it's kind of a shock absorber as well, so you get some squish there, so when you're running or walking, you get a little bit of a shock absorption from there too. And what happens with that disc, basically, structurally, it's kind of like, the easiest thing to think of it is like a jelly donut. So you've got like a casing, soft tissue casing, and inside it's squishy, like a jelly donut or like a little bit of a waterbed, something like that. And so as you move, the jelly substance inside that casing is just kind of moving around with inside the disc. So for instance, if you bend forward, and look at the side view here, if you bend forward at the discs like that, or at your spine, puts compression on the front of your spine, and it pushes the disc backwards on your spine. The reverse happens when you bend backwards. You bend back, squishes the back of the disc, pushes that disc material forward. And that's all completely normal. What happens over time, though, is that we end up doing a lot of things in a forward bent position or a slouched position, and over time that puts a lot of pressure on the front of the discs. So over time you're constantly putting pressure on the front of the discs, and you're pushing that disc material backwards, back towards the back of your spine. And ultimately what can happen there is you can weaken the casing around that disc. And so as you're bending and twisting and maybe you're lifting incorrectly, on top of that putting a lot of pressure through there, again eventually that kind of weakens the disc. And what lives right behind those discs, of course, your nerve roots do. So behind your vertebrae and your spine, you've got your spinal cord running down, and along each segment here you can see on this model is just little flimsy things. Those are your little nerve roots. And so towards the bottom of your spine, those are those nerve roots that are going to provide sensation and motor movement and stuff into your legs. So what happens is if you bulge a disc, the disc material, the squishy stuff, kind of pushes backwards. And it could push backwards and not cause any trouble at all. And in fact, they say roughly 80% of Americans walking around, if you just did an MRI, would have a disc bulge with no symptoms. But for a lot of people, you're not that lucky, and at some point that disc bulge actually touches on one of those nerve roots. And so what happens is you get something like sciatica, especially if it's in a lower lumbar level. And it feels like any spot along your leg that nerve provides sensation to, you're getting pain along that nerve now because you're touching the nerve. It's kind of like if you've ever hit your funny bone. That nerve provides sensation to the pinky side of your forearm, but if you whack that nerve and put pressure on it, or you sit on it for too long, all of a sudden you start to get different feelings and you get sensation all along that nerve. So that's basically the same thing that's happening inside your spine. With the bulging, that's kind of a mild term for the disc has bulged back. It's pushed back a little bit, but for the most part, if it's just a bulging disc, it's treatable. So you can push it back to where it belongs with certain exercises, certain stretches, things like that, and certain postures and stuff to avoid, things like that. So go into more on that on different videos. But that's just kind of understanding what causes that. So again, it's that disc pressing backwards against that nerve root. Potentially could be several discs, but usually it's just one. What we do with treatment then, and I will kind of jump into the next video or different videos. We've got a video called the top 3 exercises for treating a bulging disc. But basically you're doing back bending type exercises because you want to put pressure on the back of the disc and start to move that disc material back forward back to where it belongs. So that's kind of the overall thing there. The other thing that you can use to combine for successful treatment though is you would really start to watch like your posture, make sure that when you're sitting you're not slouching, because slouching is basically the same thing as kind of like bending forward slightly. Not bending forward repetitively throughout the day, watching your lifting mechanics, things like that, which, you know, if you do physical therapy, of course, we get a lot more specific and walk you through and make sure you're doing everything right. But yeah, the good news there again is that if it's just a disc bulge, typically it's very treatable. You know, it may not seem treatable when you're in agony, and the pain with sciatica, if you've never had it, or if you have had it, it can be quite excruciating, so it's not something to deal with for very long, hopefully. And again, bulges are pretty treatable. If you get a little farther down the line in terms of severity, you get into things like a herniated disc or a rupture disc. Those are a little trickier. Typically, if the disc is completely ruptured, it's not treatable and it's surgical. And you kind of know that right away, at least if you're under the care of a PT, because we can say, gosh, you're trying the exercises and you just can't even tolerate them. You know, I mean, it's bad. If you've known someone who's had it, I mean, they'll tell you the same thing. It's pain that no matter what position you get into, you just can't feel better, period. Not even for a short period of time. So, if you ever have questions about that, of course, you're more than welcome to call the clinic or leave a comment here under the video or send me an email. But one of the more common things we see and treat, week in and week out, so we're always happy to talk about and help people out, relieve that pain and prevent the next disc bulge from happening. So that's a little bit more understanding about disc bulges and sciatica. And again, if you have questions, I'm happy to answer those. So thank you for watching.